While I was doing my research on holistic science, doing my PhD, whenever I went into a search engine, I come across Schumacher College. That seemed to be the place where holistic science was really recognized. And so eventually it ended up in us visiting Schumacher College, doing some studies there, and in fact, ending up living in Devon. The great gift of that connection with Schumacher College was having the connection with Dr. Shantena Sabbadini, who in fact has taught there on a number of occasions. He's going to lead us through this exploration of human becoming, who we as human beings are and might become, through the transformed scientific lens of quantum physics. He's eminently well qualified to do this. Shantena did his PhD in theoretical physics. He practiced in theoretical physics at the University of Milan and the University of California, where he also did research into the black hole and into some of the fundamental principles of quantum physics. Not only has Shantena got deep interest and deep insight into theoretical physics, quantum physics, but he's also done deep research into the correlations of quantum physics to Eastern mysticism. And so he's an authority on Taoism. He is an authority on the I Ching. He's translated the I Ching. He's worked at the Eranos Center, which explored the work of Carl Jung and the correlations to the East. And he's also been is a director of the Pari Institute, which had been established by physicist David Peat, particularly to explore the work of David Bohm and the whole notion of wholeness. So with that deep background and having published a book, Pilgrimage to Emptiness, on this very topic, we are well placed to be guided by Dr. Sabbadini on this journey into looking at who we as human beings are and might become through the lens of quantum physics. Over to you, Shantena.
Claudius, it's pleasure and honor to start this Academy series of the Holos program, and welcome everybody. Lovely being with this international company. So the first chapter of my talk, as Claudius said, wants to have a look at the notion of wholeness in ancient and traditional cultures, which is also closely related to the notion of anima mundi, the soul of the world. And I want to show you an image which comes. This picture was shown by Richard Tarnas, a great philosopher, astrologer, humanist at Eranos. And it's meant to represent the cosmology of ancient and traditional cultures. The blue color in this image represents consciousness. So a key feature of this way of looking at reality is that consciousness is everywhere. The whole world is alive and conscious. And living is entertaining a dialogue with the alive cosmos, with the alive world. The human being is part of it. And its boundaries are permeable. We mix in with the world, and the world mixes in with us. So we relate to the world as thou, not as it. And Thales of Miletus used to say, the world is full of gods. What he meant is that the world is full of consciousness. The world is a conscious organism. Now that we have lost, and let me go briefly through stages of that loss, not as a historical reconstruction, which would be much too cumbersome, but just as key steps of becoming what we have become. One step that this figure represents has to do with the agricultural revolution, which changed the structure of society and relationship in a very significant way, because the possibility to accumulate a surplus of food made possible various important changes. The division of labor, people were not anymore like masters of all kinds of trades, but had a specific function in society and depended on society for their survival, which also implied hierarchy and structures like city-states, empires, kingdoms, commerce, religion, and the introduction of money and writing. These two things are closely connected. In fact, the first examples of writing archaeologists have discovered are books of debts and credits, books of taxes, and so it's an important step in that it brought like an abstract view of reality to take quite a central role. The representation of reality becomes as central as the experience of reality itself. The map is a representation of a territory, and the mathematician Korzybski famously said, a map is not the territory. And a playful version of it is Magritte's pipe. His painting says, this is not a pipe. It wants to awaken us to the fact that this is not a pipe, it's a representation of a pipe. So gradually, abstract representations of reality came to be center stage in our culture. I don't mean to disparage that. It has a richness. It's the seed of all symbolic representations of the world. But there's a key pitfall involved in it, which is when we confuse the map for the territory. Here's another key step of the prevalence of abstraction and the loss of the world as animate and as organic and alive. That's the origin of monotheistic religions. I'm being very schematic and rough. You could discuss it in a much more subtle way, but the goal is just point out some key features. So with the monotheistic religion, consciousness moved away from the world. Consciousness exists only in human beings and in God. The alive world of organic life starts to be conceived essentially as inert matter. The drama of human existence and is humans' relationship with God, not with the world. The world loses its soul. Where are we now? We've also lost God, the vast majority of human beings. Nietzsche said God is dead. And the whole universe is just in the current materialistic view of reality, which is the dominant philosophy of our time. The world is a vast machine with no consciousness and no soul, except perhaps the blue dot you see in this picture is us. In this view, the only repository of consciousness, if at all we are, because there's another modern version of it which says that consciousness is an epiphenomenon, not any relevant or essential characteristic of a human being or of a brain, but it's like a how to say, it's like the foam cappuccino. It's a byproduct of the essential mechanisms are all material, are all processes in the brain or well, this way in which consciousness is a byproduct of material phenomena runs into essential problems. That's the one that David Chalmers famously called the hard problem of consciousness. What does he mean by the hard problem? He means all the problems that correlate, let's say, brain functioning to certain types of experiences, they can be analyzed in terms of signals passing through a complex array of neurons. But that still does not say anything about the experience of consciousness, the experience of I am, or the experience of the color red of a shirt. The experience of red is not an electromagnetic wave. It corresponds to a certain range of electromagnetic waves, but it is something like essentially different from, irreducible to. That's the hard problem of of consciousness. So where are we? Our capacity to describe the world in abstract terms has generated science, has generated technology, has allowed for incredible outcomes, like walking on the moon or studying the world of the microscopic level by creating incredible levels of energy, like in the Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Geneva, and which is one of the instrument, one of the tools of which we'll have to talk soon, talking about quantum physics. But this is another side effect of our identifying with abstraction. We lose contact with the world. We lose contact with the soul of the world. If the world is only there for us to exploit, then human beings themselves become object of exploitation. And we lose the subtle connection. We lose the relationship to the soul of the world. Well, I think I would like to stop here for now and pass it on to Jane, who will invite us to reflect.
Thank you, Shantena. Yes. So the question we have, I think, is very simple, really. Very simple, perhaps trickily simple. What is arising for you when we think about what Shantena is telling us, and how does that relate to our own life? And what I'm asking you to do is just to take a little time to reflect, maybe make a note or two, and we're going to allow 5 minutes for that. Okay, thank you, everybody. If you've got a comment to share, please add that into the chat thread. And Shantena, whenever you're ready, it'd be great to continue. Okay,
thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the comments, interesting comments in the chat. Wonderful. A paradoxical feature of our modern predicament is that while materialism is the dominant philosophy, on the edge of physics, in the perspective of quantum physics, actually the notion of matter becomes highly problematic. I could say matter dissolves, matter evaporates in quantum physics. And let me show you some images again. We go from our ordinary perception of matter as something like solid and concrete into being made of atoms, which means being mostly made of empty space, because the atoms occupy very little space. So we are mostly empty. But atoms are not the end of the story, even though the name says indivisible. They're described as consisting of subatomic particles, which are neither the ultimate reality of things, because ultimately they are fields, which are like abstract mathematical descriptions of processes. So when we go deep enough into the heart of matter, matter evaporates. Matter becomes pure mathematics. We say there's nothing in it. We reach emptiness, vacuum, but it's a very rich nothing. All this wonderful universe emerges from it. Could you think that these two creatures are made of fields? Yes, ultimately they are, as everything else. As the snow, the trees, as you and me. Intersecting, interacting fields. But this nothing has structure. It's a cosmos, not chaos. Galileo already at the beginning of modern science formulated as the book of nature is written in mathematical characters. Well, let's examine a little bit in greater detail this process of matter dissolving and of the connection this has with consciousness, with mind. As I said, the representation of the world as something concrete and solid goes gradually disappearing in quantum physics. Probably the last shore of representability is the model of the atom, Bohr's model of the atom, which is the model we study in school. We study that atoms are like little planetary system with the nucleus at the center, as the sun, and electrons orbiting on orbits around the nucleus. This model includes what was the first step, the first discovery in the lineage of quantum physics, which was the notion of the quantum, introduced by Max Planck in 1900. Energy can be exchanged only in discrete packets. 1, 2, 3, not 1.5. That's probably the last intuitive model we have of an atom. Beyond it, it's pure math. So the real evaporation of matter is probably, we could date it with Heisenberg's uncertainty principle in 1927. There's an intrinsic degree of undeterminacy, uncertainty, intrinsic in things. Not because we don't know enough, not because we don't have enough information. Even with all the possible information, there's always a margin of uncertainty, indeterminate. So we can never know something completely, not even something as simple as an electron. To make this more concrete, let me describe what we could call the archetypal experiment of quantum physics. It's an idealization of actual experiments, but it's a powerful idealization which condenses all the essential ideas of quantum physics in a very direct form. The experiment is the following: like there's on the left side, there's a beam of electrons or a beam of particles, could be any particles coming in. There's a screen, it meets a screen with two slits called A and B in this picture, and hits a photographic plate on the other side. And the question we are asking is like, what pattern do we see on the photographic plate? Now we could make the experiment in various steps. One step is, let's say we close one slit. We close slit B and only leave slit A. We send our beam of electrons or particles, whatever they are, and we look at the patterns they form on the photographic plate. Look at the right side of this picture. There's two curves called A prime and B prime. And A prime is the top one. It's right in front of slit A. That's the pattern we get when we have only slit A open. The same happens with slit B if we only leave slit B open. The lower bell in that right side of the figure, B prime, is the pattern we observe. But now the interesting point is that when we leave both slits open, we get that wavy pattern we see in the center of the picture. So we don't see what we could reasonably expect, like if all the electrons passing through A create the top bell curve, and all those that pass through B create the bottom bell curve, altogether they should create the sum or the combination of those two bell curves. But that's not the case. They get a completely different pattern, which is the pattern that we know from other experiences. It's the pattern which is formed when two waves meet. It's a typically undulatory pattern, a wave pattern. So a first question arises like, what are these electrons? Are they particles or are they waves? In a sense, they are particles, like each one hits the photographic plate in a definite spot, just as we would expect a particle to do. But then we take the statistics of many, we send a whole bunch of electrons on the photographic plate, and we get a wave pattern. So they have a kind of a double nature, particle and wave, depending on how we look at them. Which also tells us another interesting thing. It tells us that we cannot assume that each electron passes either through A or through B. Because if we could assume that, then inevitably all those that pass through A form the curve A prime, all that pass through B form the curve B prime, and altogether they must form the sum of those two patterns, which is not the case. The pattern is like the one we get when two waves come together. So it's as if, in some ways, each electron passes through both slits at once. Or as if each electron passes through a slit as a wave and interferes with itself coming through the other slit as a wave. There's one last feature of this experiment, which is crucial, and that's I want to capture the electron. I want to decide which slit it has come through. For that purpose, I put a detector next to one of the slits. The detector will give me a signal if an electron comes through it, or won't give me a signal if there's no electron coming through it. Then problem solved. If the detector signals, then I will know that the electron has passed through that particular slit. Okay, I put there my detector, I turn it on, and surprise, surprise, I don't observe on the photographic plate the wavy pattern, but I observe the sum of those two bell curves. So when I observe the electron, it really seems to behave like I would expect, that goes through either slit A or slit B. I turn off my detector and I get the wavy pattern back. So a key feature of quantum physics is that things behave differently when they're watched. When an observation is made, some peculiar phenomenon seems to happen which collapses this wavy pattern into a classical alternative, either or, slit A or slit B, curve A prime or curve B prime. This is a nice metaphor for it. It comes from a lovely French book called Le Cantique des Cantiques, in which the first cantique is canticle or song, and the second cantique is quantum, the quantum people. So this is the song of the quantum people. On the left of the picture, there's a classical pond, and on the right side there's a quantum pond. And here's a fisherman and a fish in the pond. In a classical pond, a fish is always somewhere. It's in a localized place. I may not see it. Maybe the water is turbid and I cannot see through, but I know it's somewhere. Only in one place and not in another. That's not the case with a quantum pond. In a quantum pond, the fish, before being fished, is spread out throughout the whole pond. In the moment I fish it out, in the moment I observe it, it gets localized in that precise spot. In quantum physics terms, the fish is in a superposition of states. Is superposed in all places of the pond, and this superposition collapses when an observation is made. When I put a detector there, or when I fish, I take the fish out of the water. Well, this feature of quantum physics, that things are inherently uncertain and that they take on a concrete value only when an observation comes in, was a quite shocking notion. And even some of the founders of quantum physics had trouble with it. And one who had trouble with it was Albert Einstein. He was never happy with this aspect of quantum physics. He was convinced that this is a consequence of our incomplete understanding of quantum physics. He assumed that there are some hidden parameters that we don't see. If we could see them, then things would be exactly determined, like in classical physics. On this, he had intense discussion with Niels Bohr, who was the head of the Copenhagen School of Quantum Physics, for 8 years, in which Einstein constantly posed Bohr challenges. How would quantum physics explain this and this and this? And Einstein was very clever in devising like imaginary experiments that would put quantum physics in trouble. But Niels was also clever and mostly was able to answer the objections of Einstein. But the masterpiece of Einstein's critique of quantum physics is an experiment he proposed in 1935, which is the following. I won't describe all the details of it, but the essence of it. There's two particles that have a correlation between them. In this case, they are represented by those little arrows. They are generated in such a way, let's say, that the arrows are always opposite to each other. If one arrow points up, the other one points down. If one arrow points right, the other one points left. These two particles like fly apart, and then we have two observers. They're called Alice and Bob here. And they have an apparatus to measure those little arrows, which, by the way, are called spin in quantum physics. So they have, each one has their own apparatus to measure spin, and can choose to measure spin in various directions by rotating the apparatus. As you see, for example, in this case, Bob's apparatus is rotated of an angle with respect to the Alice apparatus. So they can choose which orientation give to their apparatus, or which spin measure in the particle that's flying to them. Now, what quantum physics predicts is that the orientation Alice chooses to give to her apparatus influences the results that Bob sees in his own. And this, independently how far away they are, they may be so far that not even a light ray can communicate in time with them for describing the rotation of the apparatus. This correlation seems to be there intrinsically, without any signal exchange, without any force acting between those two particles. It's the notion we now call entanglement. And it's now universally accepted. Not only that, but it's the base of the work people are doing on quantum computers. They're attempting to use entanglement to transmit information faster than classically it would be possible. But in 1935, when Einstein proposed this, it seemed something so absurd that it was a very strong criticism of quantum physics. Bohr was quite at a loss on how to explain this absurd feature of quantum physics. Well, some time went by, and eventually the experiment was realized in practice. It was compared, the results were compared to what would be required by, let's say, a classical idea of matter, described by two essential properties. One is called realism and the other one locality. Realism means that when I observe a property of a system, there is something in the system itself. It's not just my imagination. And locality means that things interact only by exchanging forces or signals. So they interact locally when they are together, or they can exchange something that joins them. When the experiment was done, it perfectly confirmed the expectation of quantum physics and did not confirm realism and locality. So let's say the decisive experiment was done around 1980. So since about 40 years ago, we know that matter is not realistic and local. There is no possible description of quantum phenomena which is realistic and local. If we take realistic and local as meaning, as defining what we ordinarily consider as an object, a thing is realistic and local, then the experiment done 40 years ago and repeated innumerable times since then tells us that matter is not realistic and local. Matter is not made of things. What is it made of? Of something which involves, in some way, which is still far from understanding, but in some way involves consciousness. Okay, this is let me add one more thing. The single event, the single observation, this is the essence of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, is always indeterminate. Quantum physics predicts probability, but it doesn't tell you what's happening in a single experiment. It doesn't tell you where on the photographic plate that particle will hit. There'll be a curve of probability, but never. So the single event, the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, who for 25 years kept a very interesting correspondence with Carl Gustav Jung, described the single quantum observation as an act of creation. It's something which arises out of the blue. And in their conversation, Pauli and Jung recognize kind of a common pattern in quantum observation and in what Jung called synchronicity. Both are like a cause of phenomena. They're not describable in terms of cause and effect. Both arise out of nothingness. Maybe I'll stop here for this part, this chapter.
Thank you, Shantena. That's perfect timing. I wonder if you'd like to stop sharing your screen for a short while.
Yes.
Okay. So, brilliant. So we're really lucky in that we have more people that have been able to join us than we first thought. So what I'm going to do is send us off into some breakout rooms just so that we can have a slightly more connected conversation. And you're going to have about 20 minutes to do that. I'm not going to ask for people to feed back into the big group at this stage, but if you've got some thoughts that you'd like to collect and share maybe into the chat box from your breakout spaces, that would be great. So when I press this button, in theory, you should receive an invitation, and you just click yes, and you'll be magically transported into your breakout spaces, and I will bring you back in about 20 minutes. Okay, I will see you shortly. I'm going to post a little question into the chat space that you'll be able to see. But basically, without being terribly clever about all the clever physics that we've just been hearing about, what is it that we have become? Is the question. Okay, I'm going to open those rooms. Marlene, are you okay? Have you received your invitation? Michelle, I can still see you. Are you okay? Do you need any help? Hello, welcome back.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
I think everybody has landed safely. I don't think we're missing anyone. Oh no, we're missing one person. One person is lost in the ether.
We've been flying on a flying carpet in our...
I'm just trying to work out who it is that we've lost. Right, I will try and recover them, Shantena. Would you like to start your next section? If anybody has any comments or themes or ideas to post in the chat thread, that would be great. That you brought back from your groups, and we can pick those up in our whole group conversation later.
Okay. So should I? We'll do the whole group sharing later, right?
That's right, please. Yeah. So if you move to your next section, and I will try and track down on our missing person.
Okay. So we'll move on to the Tao, and let let it emerge how it relates to what we just said about quantum physics. Let me share screen again. And the image. Okay, Taoism, which is both a philosophy and a religion. And the Tao I will talk about is mostly the philosophy, and can be characterized as strongly experiential. It has a skeptical attitude to knowledge and language, certainly a skeptical attitude to any definite final statement or statements of truth, as an emphasis on spontaneity, non-doing, abstaining from engagement. And I will talk particularly about the Tao Te Ching. You may wonder why I spell it in this strange way, Tao Te Ching. It's the Pinyin romanization of Chinese language, which is now slowly becoming the universally accepted. We were much more used to the Wade Giles transliteration, which is Tao Te Ching. Jing or Ching, by the way, means book or classic. So this is the classic of Tao and Te. Tao will deal with that. We'll have to talk about it. De is virtue or power. It's similar to the Latin virtus. So this is the book of the way, Tao. Tao is the basic meaning of Tao is way. The book of the way and of virtue, or of the way and its virtue, or of the way and its power. Chinese is quite flexible and open language, and can be interpreted in various ways. It's a small book which consists of 81 chapters or 81 short poems, we could also call it. And it's traditionally attributed to Lao Tzu. The name means the old master. And modern scholarship is divided about whether Lao Tzu really exists, to what extent is the author of the book. The Chinese tradition places in the 6th century BC, based on various accounts of meeting of Lao Tzu with Confucius. And the dates of Confucius are solidly established, so that that gives us a hint about Lao Tzu, but it's not at all clear to what extent those meetings with Confucius are just confabulation. There's an interesting traditional story about the origin of the book. which is that Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching when he was old and on his way to exile. The story goes that he was the historian, the archivist of the Zhao dynasty of the empire. And in late in age, also somewhat disillusioned, disappointed by the politics of the empire, he decided to retire and go spend the rest of his last years in the Western wilderness. West for China was the steppes of Central Asia, inhabited by barbarians, so it was kind of out of the world. So Lao Tzu, the old master, decided to go spend his last years out of the world. And the story goes that when he comes to the border of the Zhao state, there's a guardian of the pass, and the Chinese text is not clear whether this guardian of the pass is a human being, is a spirit. The guardian of the pass asks him who he is, where he goes, and when he recognizes him, says, "Master, you won't be able to pass if you don't leave us something written." And the story goes that Lao Tzu never wanted to write anything. In this, he agreed with Wittgenstein, who says, "Of that of which one cannot speak, one should remain silent." So he had never written anything in all his life, but he's kind of touched by the request of this mysterious being and accepts and stops there, writes the Tao Te Ching, delivers it to the guardian of the past, and disappears into the wilderness. So it's the book starts. So the book is about the Tao, which, as I said, it means mainly. Let me move this. The basic meaning is way or road or path. But then metaphorically, it becomes also a guiding principle, a norm to lead, to direct, to govern, doctrine, art, method, and so on. The book is about the Tao, but it starts with the famous sentence that the Tao that can be spoken, the Tao that can be talked about, is not the constant Tao, or it's not the eternal Tao. It can be interpreted in various ways. And in one way, which is very close to the Taoist penchant for the unexpressible, was beyond language. So as a critique of language, it says, any discourse that can be spoken is not a constant discourse, or it's not an absolutely valid discourse. In this sense, the Taoists are close to the postmodern thinkers. There is no ultimate truth, there is no ultimate statement. But while the postmodernists, the consequence they draw from this skeptical attitude in postmodern is, if nothing can be said about truth, let's forget about truth and just focus on discourse and language as creator of intersubjective realities. The Taoists draw the opposite conclusion. If nothing can be said about truth, forget about saying, forget about discourse, forget about language. And the only thing that will really matter will be direct experience. So the book starts with that famous sentence: the Tao that can be told. Well, this is the first form, the language form. Any way or any discourse that can be told is not a constant way. There is no ultimate truth. And the same is said about naming. Any name that can be named is not a constant name. Names change. Language is not a solid anchor. Now, naming is very important in the Lao Tzu. In which sense he uses the word naming is clear in the second verse of the text. He says, that which has no name is the beginning of heaven and earth. It's the origin of everything. That which has name, or naming, is the mother of the 10,000 things, or 10,000 beings. The Chinese use the same word for being and thing. So the multiplicity, the 10,000 things, arises in naming. The beginning of everything is without name. The beginning of everything is still the unus mundus, the totality. But naming splits into 10,000 things, 10,000 beings. The next verse of this first chapter makes it comes down from a cosmic level to a very human experiential level. It talks about desire. Desire in Lao Tzu is attraction and repulsion. So it's desire in a positive or negative sense is what we're drawn to and what we reject. It doesn't so much matter whether it's attraction or repulsion. What matters is that there's an affection there that binds us to it or against it. What are the consequences of this? Lao Tzu says, therefore, constantly without desire if you're not prey to desire, you may contemplate its wonder. Its wonder is the mystery, the profound, the hidden. Constantly having desire, you may contemplate its boundaries. As soon as you're taken by attraction and repulsion, then there's me and not me. There's this and that. Then you're prisoner of the world of boundaries. What is me and what is not me. So if you're free from desire, so the deeper message of this term is self-identification. If I'm not identified with myself as a separate being, then I can contemplate the wonder of what is. Identified with myself, with my separateness, I only contemplate the boundaries. I only contemplate the multiplicity. Just a moment. Buddha introduces this notion, which is anatta, no self. The self is an illusion. A metaphor for it is like the ocean and the wave. Our self is like waves rising in the ocean. But the wave is an impermanent phenomenon. It dissolves into other waves. It forms, it grows, it dissolves. So do we. From the point of view of physics, the ocean is infinitely extended fields. We are superposition patterns of these interference fields, which form and dissolve and create new forms in dissolving. So if the wave wanted to conceive of itself as permanent, would be inevitably frustrated because it is not permanent. That's the first of Buddha's Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth is usually formulated as existence is suffering. But I would suggest that we should read existence according to etymology. Ex sister. Existence is ex sister, is standing out. So if I'm identified with myself as standing out of the whole, standing out as waves standing out of the ocean, that is suffering. That is frustration, inevitably. If I'm not identified with that, then I'm in touch with the mystery. But the key to the whole chapter, to the whole first poems, let's say, first poem, is this last verse, which says, these two, they arise jointly, yet have different name, or yet we name them differently. Jointly, they are called the hidden. The hiddenmost part of the hidden, the gate of all wonders. So what are these two that Lao Tzu is talking about? They are what is without name, what is beyond name, and the name. It's what is beyond desire and what is with desire. These two, they arise jointly. We distinguish them and see them as opposites. But in their essence, they are the hidden truth. So what Lao Tzu is suggesting is not be the ocean and forget about the waves. That's not possible. It's like being in two places at once. Be the ocean, but dance your dance as a wave. Be consciousness, be the consciousness of the whole, but be yourself, be this individual being. Dancing this dance of the two is the secret of all secrets. Wait, maybe I will stop here and let us have a break, and then I want to move on.
Okay, Shantena, thank you very much. Maybe would you like to stop sharing your screen, perhaps?
Yes, definitely.
Thank you. Okay, so if we take a very quick 10-minute comfort break, so stand up, grab a drink, come back in 10 minutes and maybe collect your thoughts and ideas that we would like to share in our whole group conversation. So we're going to be back in 10 minutes, and Shantena will bring us back with some more thoughts, and then we'll enter into our whole group conversation, and we're due to finish in about an hour and a quarter. Okay, so I will see you all shortly. Okay, Shantena, I think we'll make a start to reconvene, if that's okay. So you had some thoughts, some story thoughts.
Yes, I'd like to share some thoughts, questions, like way to open reflection on our themes. And one has to do with wholeness and selflessness. How are these two things related? And I'd like to tell you a couple of stories from Chuang Tzu, the other great master of the Taoists. Chuang Tzu says, if two boats in crossing a river, coming to collision, one of the boat people will start screaming at the other one and will become furious. But if an empty boat with no one on it comes into collision with another boat, the boatman, however choleric he may be, has no way to get angry. Says Chuang Tzu, when you go through life empty of a self, like an empty boat, nothing can harm you. Another story by Chuang Tzu has as main character Confucius. Often the Taoists use Confucius as a character in their stories. Confucius is watching a waterfall, and the water falls from great height and creates tremendous turbulence beneath. And Confucius sees that there's a man swimming in there, and gets worried, and this is a suicidal thing. Nobody can swim in that water so wild and turbulent. But he says that the man comes out of the river, kind of shakes the water from his hair, and looks quite happy and sings. So Confucius goes and questions him. Says, "How do you do this? How do you survive in this turbulent water?" And the man says, "That's easy. Where the water pulls me down, I go down with it. Where it pulls me up, I go up with it. I don't impose my will on the water, and then the water carries me." Let me read you also another chapter of the Tao Te Ching, having to do with this. It's one of my favorites. It says, "Seeking knowledge, day by day you increase. Seeking Tao, day by day you decrease. Decreasing and again decreasing, you reach to non-doing. By non-doing, nothing is left undone." Non-doing is a key notion of the Taoists, but it does not mean like literally doing nothing. It means doing from a space of no self, no attachment, no I, no ego. Being an empty boat. When the action comes from that space of emptiness, then it harmonizes with the movement of energy around it. By being selfless, becomes in touch with the whole. Um, a friend who's part of the Conscious Consulting Group, of which there's 4 of us present here tonight, has proposed a beautiful question. He has asked, why is the human species worth saving? And has suggested an answer or a hypothesis, because we are the eyes of the universe, the eyes with which the universe looks at itself. The eyes, consciousness looking at itself. Let me show you an image, a couple of images more.
Shantena, you've gone a little quiet. Has your microphone moved? Aha,
Can you hear me?
yes, that's good. Yes.
Okay. I'm trying to, yes. This is Vishnu dreaming the universe. Vishnu is lying on the serpent infinite, on the cosmic ocean, and dreams the world. And all his characters around him are the heroes of the Mahabharata, but also us looking at the picture. We're all characters in Vishnu's dream. It's an ancient version of Matrix. So the universe arises that's the opposite of the notion that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of matter. It's actually, matter is an epiphenomenon of consciousness. And let me show you another picture. Why is it not working? In Hinduism and Buddhism, there's this notion that the net of Indra. Indra is the king of the gods. It's like Zeus in the Greek mythology. In the palace of Indra, there's this magic net, which is kind of a spider web with a drop of dew, with a dewdrop at each intersection of the line. And each of these drops reflects all the other drops, and the other drops reflect in turn other drops, and this same drop. It's an infinite tangle of reflections. So it's one consciousness reflecting itself in innumerable ways, and yet each drop being one individuated drop. in the whole net. Okay, I think I would like to stop here and listen to the comments and the questions and what comes alive.
This has been a wonderfully rich and provocative presentation with enormous depth, with implications, with conclusions that we could speculate and draw on that are vast. One of our temptations might be to want to ask questions about quantum physics. The other one might be to want to ask which is the right and wrong philosophy. But what I want to suggest is that we rather engage in a process of dialogue. So what dialogue is, it's not about debate. It's not about arguing points. It's actually getting deeply in touch with our own process and articulating that which is wanting to rise right now. It is about that question that is arising right now.
Recording.
And it's being recorded. And in that, the rest of us are not looking to answer that question. We're not wanting to offer an opinion on that question. We don't want to be reactive to the question. We actually want to respond to what's rising within us as a response to the bigger context. So in the dialogue process, by the way, the person who formulated that was David Bohm. David Bohm was renowned for saying that through dialogue, we could access a much deeper quality of collective intelligence. So it is about articulating what's rising now, and then for the rest of us to engage in deep listening. Deep listening to see if we can experience what that person is experiencing. And the beauty of the deep listening, the deep being with together, is that in that synthesizing of energies, of insights, of ideas, the holistic process is happening anyway in what is called emergence. So what I'm going to propose we do is we don't rush it. We have sufficient time. I'm very pleased for that. And we just use the same reaction button with a little hand. So it'll look like this. When the hand goes up, that means I'd like to participate. And when we're done, we take it away again. So that we are not kind of saying, can I go, can't I go? Just when you're ready, you just put up your hand. So that's the idea. What's rising for you as a result of this rich presentation, some of the amazing observations in the chat box. And when you're ready to go, put up your hand and let it come from not a reaction, but from a response of your own experience. And I'm going to just start with a key thought that has been really pressing me. And it relates to a presentation that we had with Dr. Ed Gale just last time when he said the human narrative was about achievement, performance, and progress. And we were looking for a different narrative that wasn't based on this notion of, I am important because I'm doing great and big things. And that gets so hooked into a material world. The kind of question that has emerged for me listening to non-doing, listening to being with the whole process is how does that radically transform our economic philosophy, the application of technology to produce more stuff. What could society look like at a fundamental level if we were to escape the trap of having to perform in order to have esteem? whether our esteem is not based in the independent I that you were talking about, Shantena, but that the esteem, it is a sense of knowing who we are as an expression of that deeper ocean in that magnificent moment. That has really provoked me to ponder the potential of society in its relationship with the deep enabling milieu. And I'll continue to ponder that. And that's me and whoever is ready to go. When you're ready to go, there's no rush. Just put up your hand.
I see the hand of Christian up.
Yeah.
Actually, it's Julia's hand.
One thought that comes up to me also in what you said, Claudius. For me, more and more, I feel it's so disempowering for me to think about what everything that we learn from Shantena can mean for economics, or for the world, or for society, or politics. I see so many people discussing about the larger systems and systems change. And I more and more want to bring in the question of really what does it mean on a very, very small scale. I think like maybe reflecting the implications for the smallest scale I imagine, which is my personal life that I have a direct influence in, could also make a difference. And I really think about what does it mean, what does non-doing or doing from a state of non-identification, what does that really mean ultimately? Because this is the opposite of how I was brought up, and the current paradigm of self-optimization and thinking about what can I do with my life? What's the purpose of my life? What do I want? What do I want to get out of life? And how can I make a lot of impact, and also the self-importance. So this is for me a question I don't know if anyone can answer it, but I would like to ask myself, what does it really truly mean, the non-doing, like to live life from a place of non-doing, in a sense of not working from a place of being totally identified with my ego. I think that's really hard. But maybe this could make a huge difference ultimately, maybe more than thinking about how society should be or how economy should work. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And you are muted up.
I think not an answer, but my response to that question, Julia, would be that a way to potentially look at it is the same way to look at breaking any bad habit, which would be, instead of trying to focus on undoing the bad habit, rather to replace it with a good habit. And I think this exact process, this engagement in community and a somewhat unwitting forgetting of the self and experience of a community-centered collective conversation is the good habit that unwittingly sends us out of the focus on the self.
If I could offer something in this space, I started in our small group to share with us, but again, in response to your question, what I feel is that we really as human beings develop our intelligence because we do not have strong instincts like animals. And animals have got a very strong instinctual framework to get them to cope with the world, and it takes thousands of years to change. We have got blessed or cursed, I don't know where you want to see it, has got human intelligence to do that. And I think for us to cope with this turbulent times, I feel, and this is what I've shared, you know, that the one part of our intelligence is to really tune in, to remain tuned in with this space, this quantum space of no-thingness, of unlimited possibilities, and just be resonant. I think I like about Carl Jung, you know, pick up the synchronicities. Michael shared with us the book of Ian McGilchrist, you know, getting our right brain to work in Ian McGilchrist, to really cultivate that. But then on the other hand, as I said earlier, you know, I mean, our ego's got a very bad name because the ego's become a prison for many people. But I think the ego's got some amazing value because the ego can anchor, gives definition and shape all these experiences and non-experiences that we have in the quantum field, to land it and to ground it. And then obviously not to forget that we are part of a much bigger ecosystem, and to make sure that we relate not only with my own ego ideas, but also with that of others. And I feel that in a nutshell, if we have those three capabilities, what I want to call the triple DNA of the new world, of a new human being, to send the sensor, the shaper, and the integrator. I think that might help us to cope in this world. I don't know whether that makes sense, Claudius. You must tell me if I'm off track.
Thank you, Frederick. I see Michael Stock's hand is up there.
Thank you, and thank you to Frederick for reminding me of Ian's wonderful book. What I wanted to contribute really was appreciation for Shantena's reference to Lao Tzu and the story of how when he was going into exile in the Western lands, he had to give the gift of some writing. I thought that was immensely so poetic. In these troubled times, many of us might be attracted by the notion of going on as a pilgrim to some distant lands. The other thing I want to mention in terms of what is rising up is the happiness, I think, at some level, I experienced some months ago listening to Roger Penrose, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on black holes. And if I understand his book and his work, the universe, as some people have imagined, might expand and then just collapse. And then there might be another universe, like a heartbeat. And so I'm deeply curious with the notion that matter is mathematics, but mind is eternal. And I wonder how that would work in a universe which is ebbing and flowing.
That's a wonderful question, and I'm going to leave that to Shantena to that one.
Well, it's
and I see, and yeah.
I'm not sure how we are with sound. Are we okay with sound?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the notion of multiple universes, which was up to a few years ago mere fantasy, is becoming more and more credible in the physical community, because it's beautiful, elegant. It has some mathematically attractive qualities, and we are start to becoming aware of the fact that whatever is mathematically coherent might be the case. apart from the fact that human beings, we don't know how, or have harbored such thoughts forever. In Hindu mythology, there's like the breath of Brahma and the day of Brahma. What's this mystery we're part of? Is it part of a larger mystery? Fascinating questions. We're far from being able to answer, and probably will keep being far from being able to answer, but lovely to speculate on.
So the question that has been bothering me, and when I say bothering, it is a generative bothering, it is having a glimpse into a different reality. I see your hand, Marcus, I'll come to you in a minute. Having a different glimpse of potential reality, aspect of my life wants to be reformed, reviewed, transformed. That's the question that is coming to me. And I'm just going to hold that and pass over to you, Marcus.
But Claudio, could you first repeat the question, because the sound was not so clear.
Over to you, Marcus.
Well, I'll repeat Shantena's question first. Perhaps you could repeat what you just said, as it was not audible. Claudius.
Thank you.
So what I was suggesting that given this vision of a possible different way of being, what patterns of mind, what habits of mind want to be changed, want to be transformed? What limiting thoughts and behaviors and practices are those that want to be challenged in the face of this glimpse of another possibility? That's the question that I'm posing to myself. So with that, I'm handing over to you.
Thank you.
This question of what non-doing is, that's fascinated me for a long time. And I once came across a line in the book, or in a series of books called The Earthsea Quartet by Ursula Le Guin. And I'm not going to manage to articulate it verbatim, but I'll paraphrase it as good as I can. And it goes something like this, that when we were young, we all imagined that a mage or a wizard was somebody who was so powerful that he could do anything. And then when we grow up, we begin to realize that a mage is exactly so powerful that he can take the next step. That it is not the access to all ways and all roads, but it is the access to the path that is exactly in front of us, the next step of which is connected immediately to the here and now. And for me, this experience happens occasionally, that I'm able to understand that what I'm doing is not answering the question of what's the best thing I could do if I had every possibility, but more that it's about I am right here and now, and what am I drawn to do? So it is not a decision that I need to make consciously, but rather consciously I realize, I take the action, I turn into reality that which arises in the moment. And that's the closest I've come to musing on that.
Thank you, Marcus. I see Ed's hand is up, and you're muted, Ed.
What has arisen for me is something that Sabbadini said about acting from the space of no attachment, the empty boat example, that action from that space harmonizes with the energy around it, that is in touch with the energy of the whole. And so I'm just sitting with the thoughts of, you know, what is the energy of the whole? You know, I immediately think of Teilhard love, you know, as the energy of the whole. But I think that's a thought that I need to think about.
Thank you, Ed. So whilst we sit in silence, the folks who are experts at dialogue say that the silence can be very generative. So we don't have to be uncomfortable with that. Leon.
I was thinking more about what was said earlier about how anything that happens in a quantum physics experiment is changed by the way that it's observed. And I was thinking about what you said after about how we are the universe experiencing itself. And so I thought that when we look in a mirror, we never actually see what is there. It's always reversed. So if we are the universe looking at itself, do we see it as it is, or is the mirror problem still present? Or alternatively, is what we see in both cases correct due to the fact that there is nothing but subjective experience?
Wonderful, wonderful question.
And then more, are both acts naive? If you stare at yourself in a mirror, or if you look at the universe and experience its beauty, are both acts naive if we are the consciousness itself?
I think the nature of the universe is being naive. It's utmost simplicity to what we have hardly any access to anymore.
You know, I want to share a thought on this question of the particle and wave. It's not coming from the perspective of a scientist or a wannabe scientist, but a more philosophical perspective. And I think it relates to the question you've raised, Leon. When I think of the wave and the particle, I notice a wave on the ocean coming into the shore. And if it were a universal wave, it would have a very defined universal characteristic of amplitude and interval. But as I stand on the shore and the wave strikes me, I experience it. The wave has been experienced in a very particular place and location. So the wave becomes real in my experience. And that's the way I kind of make sense of the particle-wave duality, the collapse of the wave function, not scientifically, philosophically. But to relate to your question then, there is the wave and there's me that is the interpreter of that. And so the experience is a meeting of me, the observer, the experiencer of that phenomenon. I draw out of the ocean, I'm thinking Shantena's quantum pond, that it is me fishing that gets the fish to be caught. And so what that tends to say to me is that the individual experience, the individual consciousness is the key. And absolutely there is an interpretation. It is my experience that is interpreting. Now, one could ask, is my interpretation generative or not generative? Is it right or is it wrong? And it is the impact of my interpretation of that experience, the impact of that on the next step that you were talking about, Marcus, on what happens from there onwards, that generative evolutionary flow that is going to be taking one or another trajectory according to the way I've done my interpretation. And that in itself is an ongoing learning, discovering, emergent process. So it's not right or wrong. It's part of how all of that comes into being. And what it does bring back to me is the key role that I play in my own experience of reality, and how that indeterminism enables me to take another look at how I experience reality. And having said that, I'm not sure that I'd like to try and say that again, so I'm going to hand over to Christian or Julia.
I would just like to add something to the question of Leon and what you said. I once listened to a talk by Eckhart Tolle, and he suggested to take out the term of my out of the conversation. He said, it's not your life, it's just life. And it was for me a very important moment to understand it's not my life, it's just life. Maybe it's not even my interpretation and even my experience. If we just try out the idea of saying, this is experience and this is life happening, and this is an interpretation taking place. Maybe it's not my interpretation. And I thought it was really liberating, the mere thought that I am life and it's not my life, but this is just life unfolding and some interpretation that life generates. I thought it was a very, very, very simple and interesting thought of somehow detaching from identification.
Beautiful.
Thank you. I see, Marcus, that your hand is up there.
I want to know what it feels like for the universe when it touches me with a wave.
I think it shudders. I think there's a little ripple, like goosebumps.
I did have something else to say as well, which was that I was reminded of a thought that I don't know when it happened in my life, but it fairly early on as a child involved in a conversation with adults around big matters that they understood and I didn't. And there was somehow something about the idea that in one of our fictions, we imagine that we're created by God. And so God comes first is the point in this story. And so what happened was that I came up with this story that condensed over time. And then in my teenage years, I think it was more articulated. I imagined, what if it's the other way around, right? That God is made through all the experiences that we have, much like that the quanta of the universe come together to a being of consciousness that arises at the other end. So in a way that we anticipate it, and each contribution is essential to it. So I better pay attention.
Could you say that in another way, please, Mark?
What if not all beings in time were made by one God before, but that all the beings with all their experiences throughout time come together to make that God?
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And we haven't done such a good job on that.
Maybe this is the nightmare part.
Right. Well, not only, because there's also all the beautiful mystical experiences human beings have experienced.
I was wondering whether this is something that needs to be understood once or practiced every single day of your life. So if you don't own your life, if you are life, or if you want to be the ocean but dance your dance as a wave, how is that something that you need to know or something that you need to do every single day? And how can you be a practitioner of that idea?
I'm for the practice.
What activities, if there are any, serve that philosophy? Is it switching off? Is it reading? Like what are the sort of tangible things that you can do day-to-day life, if any, that serve this philosophy? Or has
so hold that thought, Leon. Hold that thought. And I see that Denise wants to participate.
Leon, I think we're all looking for the playbook. What is the if this then that? Like, what is the playbook? Like, what are those 10? What's the checklist? The 10 things I can do today. But that just actually sparked a second thought about the fact that really is practice. And I think every day you have to consciously have that thought in your mind and experience your practice every day. I don't think it's a thing or a pattern, but I think it really is the daily practice of being aware. But my original thought, Shantena, earlier on the presentation, you mentioned when we came out of being an agricultural society. And that really struck a chord with me because I work in the future of work space. And I think that we can actually promote and create a path to human becoming through the language of work. I think it's so fundamental to everything that we do. And reflecting on the way that you just described the whole presentation, it really kick something off for me in that when we went from nomadic hunter-gatherer to agriculture, we were no longer autonomous. We became part of the process and part of the system, which meant we could not self-survive. We were dependent on the system.
Right.
And perhaps that's the root of individuation, where we became individuals and no longer part of the whole, because we needed the system to work to give us what we needed to live and survive. And I think that's where materialism started from. We had to desire in a territorial way things, food, land, housing, clothing. And I think over time that desire for materialism is where we got the idea of who has the biggest house is the more esteemed person. We lost our sense of where do we place value. I think that's been a curse for since agricultural economy began. And I wonder if where we are right now, that pursuit of materialism and things has lost its sheen. And it feels to me like we're at a fork in a road, a paradigm shifting fork in the road that we haven't experienced in a very long time. And I know that that's happening because we're here having these questions, where we're asking each other these questions. Where in the last, how long have we ever met like this to discuss these things? So I wonder, is the fog lifting and we are at the fork in a road where we are really starting to understand that the materialistic nature and the desire for that for sustenance and life is no longer the path that we desire. And it is truly not necessarily the individuation, but the collective that's coming out and it's emerging. And I feel like that's what's emerging. It is the power of us coming together. So I'm not sure if that makes sense, but for me, just when you mentioned about becoming out of the cultural economy and the pursuit of materialism that no longer seems to be what we want, the fork in the road. And where is that fork? Or where does it lead us? I think it leads us to a greater sense of human becoming. So I'm very, and we mentioned this on our breakout, I'm really bullish what's to come. I think our best days are ahead of us, for sure. And I think that we're sharpening the tools in our tool belt to get there.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you, Denise. I see your hand up, Anthony, and I see yours again, Marcus. Anthony?
Leon, I really appreciated your question about something to be understood once or a practice. I've heard a number of teachers speak about the alternating effects of the practices of meditation and of contemplation. And then thinking about it now and those practices, it's interesting because it somewhat seems to map onto what Frederick was saying in terms of the sense of the shaper and the integrator, because my understanding of it and my personal experience of it is that contemplation is a practice of sensing outward, and meditation is a practice of going inward. And there's a third aspect, which I've heard expressed as these coming together as an ecology of practices, which I really like as a way of looking at it, and that the flip-flop between the two, of the going in and the going out, is the practice. And I never personally understood the contemplation aspect until I was once standing on a beach at night, very calm sea, and the moon was low over the ocean. And I stood there looking at the moonlight reflecting on the water, and it was shimmering. And for some reason, something was unique about this night and the way I was experiencing it. And I had this experience of it being so that it felt as if I could just become entranced enough by that vibration that I would just cease to exist. I would sublimate. I would just no longer be here in this physical form to have that experience. I would just fall back into the whole. And it was this moment of feeling like the universe is just, it's all just entranced by itself, and we've arisen not entranced to be able to contemplate the trance. And yeah, there's no conclusion there. It's just what I wanted to share in response to your question.
Thank you, and we're now starting to approach time for a wrap-up, but Marcus, I see your hand is up.
I was prompted by something Denise said, which I find more complicated to say than I thought originally. And the longer I thought about it, the more complicated it became. But it had something to do with the reflexive nature of consciousness, the universe looking back on itself. I don't think that can be understood as a static piece, like looking in the mirror. I think that reflexive nature, it goes much deeper than just the looking. It's a being which has an evolutionary consequence, meaning that if you want, every step is also the edge of evolution, meaning that what we're drawn to and what we do shapes the structure of the universe. As in, agriculture has an impact on nature, and in turn, nature has an impact on us, and so forth. That's I think Churchill once said something like, first we shape the buildings and then the buildings shape us, that kind of thing. But I'm with you, Denise, if I understood your message as positive and exciting, in that I think that there's a deep intuitive wisdom at work that in a way creates certain bifurcation challenges in order for evolutionary transformation to be necessary. But that is already anticipated in the creation of that moment. But that's an optimist.
Thank you, Marcus. I see Anne's hand is up again, and then we're going to hand back. No? Okay. Anybody else there? No? Okay, so Shantena, there's been some rich input. Anything that you just want to respond to, and your closing remarks before we just give some idea of what happens in the future?
Well, my closing impression rather than remark. I'm very happy with this discussion. I think it has been exquisite. There are quite a few pearls in it. And to me, that's really the measure of satisfaction I get from talking. What facilitates and what prompts in people to share. And I've heard so many inspiring things that I'm really grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you, Shantena. So I want to close with a Bible story, which I shared with the people in my group. And it's a story of the prodigal son who demands his piece of life from source and goes off to a faraway place and squanders it in hedonistic and materialistic living, and then hits poverty of the soul. And the story is very dramatic, where he would have liked to have eaten what the pigs were eating, which in that Jewish tradition, of course, was bad stuff. So he comes to this absolute poverty of experience, and then the King James Version says he came unto himself. The New English translation said he comes to his senses. King James Version says he came to himself. And I'll go back to my father. He'll go back to source. And the beautiful story is that he then embarks on this journey back to source. And the story says his father saw him coming a long way off and went to meet him. It's almost as though source is waiting for us to realize who we are to guide us back home. And it seems to me that, Denise, when you spoke about the fork in the road, it seems to me that this is an individual experience throughout history, but maybe it's also a collective experience at this time where we are coming to a remembering and then embarking on the new journey. And the quality of that journey, according to the story of the prodigal son, he said, I will not go back demanding my portion as a son. I'll go back asking if I might serve. So that story seems to me to be quite appropriate to this time of our existence. So deep thanks to you, Shantena, for your exquisite sharing of quantum physics, of Taoism, of Eastern mysticism, your integration of that around the whole theme of wholeness, how that challenges our own view of who we are as individuals, as a collective, our role in the universe. And it is the essence of the Holos project of human becoming. Just a little advance notice, our next guest presenter will be Sheila Cook, who's going to be looking at regenerative agriculture on the 25th. And then we've got some other potentials lined up around that, but a conversation around the future of the Holos project itself will be very closely happening very shortly, a narrative for the Holos project. So maybe what I'll do is just open up the floor and just any last comment from anybody, whatever it is, before we before I invite Jane to greet us.
Claudius.
I just want to say thank you very much as well. It was lovely.
Thank you, Leon.
Okay, then our final word then is to say to Jane, thank you so much again for your facilitation. Thank you for it.
We'll be sending the recording out, will we, Claudius, just because people always ask?
We'll be sending the recording out to the participants. And thank you all for participating. Please go to the Holos website, have a look what's there. Also, we have the Holos Slack page where we can share ideas and we can share thoughts. So let's continue this engagement, and the next opportunity will be happening very shortly. Thank you so much and have a lovely evening.